Cool. Looks like we are streaming live. So everybody, welcome to our second live stream with one of our Ketamine Academy students. Today, we have the good fortune of having Christi Myers with us. She has a practice in California, and we're just chatting pre-live. She just recently moved location, so that's cool. And super excited to dive in. So Christi, if you don't mind, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and yeah, just go from there.
Well, I have been a paramedic or in emergency medicine for the last 20 years. A decade of those I've been in education. So it seems as if always timing is divine. And we have just started using ketamine as providers. So as I had been researching and just teaching ketamine, came also the knowingness of how beneficial it is for the other side of the house, which then sparked interest, which then led me to you. And then all things unfolded from there.
Awesome. So just a quick background. You have 2 degrees, right? One was in, remind me, for the bachelor's?
I have a bachelor's in public safety.
Public safety, okay.
And then a master's in leadership and education.
Cool. And so how long ago was it that you decided that ketamine could potentially be a practice ownership, rather, could be an option for you?
It's actually watching the mental health of not only self, but those of my students, and understanding just the complexities of it and how beneficial it truly is in a microdose or in such a low dosing, how it can truly provide just immense help for all. A lot of my heart and intent goes into that of our field. So this profession in general, just because we don't ask for help, and the mental health, a lot of what I put into my classroom time is mental health and how to just traverse through the complexities of what we do as profession. And then the ability to use ketamine or to debunk ketamine. Even I fell victim to ketamine when we first started using it in the field. My first sayings to self was like, isn't that a date rape drug? like isn't, and not fully understanding. So I too was ignorant in the sense of how vast and how beautiful ketamine truly is for all, because I also had that stigma associated with ketamine.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up a good point that ketamine certainly comes with a bit of a stigma, especially after the whole war on drugs with Richard Nixon, when they put it into Schedule 3 classification. And even though it's not physically addictive, which is kind of an interesting philosophy, there's a lot of people. I actually wrote a letter to the FDA and got all the documents around the moving of ketamine into Schedule 3, which is actually not what I requested. I requested the original FDA approval documents, but they sent me that pile of information. And I was scanning through it, and it was kind of interesting. There was actually a lot of resistance to moving it into Schedule 3, but because of Nixon's pressure on that new committee or whatever that he created, they ended up moving forward with it. But yeah, it does have a lot of stigma from that, and then from its recreational abuse in primarily Asia, although sometimes here as well. But from what I've read, the dose is dramatically different for recreational abuse, upwards of 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams in a single nasal inhalation, which is way, way, way more than what we are giving. I can't even imagine what that experience would be like.
I know. I tell people, because they talk about it recreationally, and I'm like, I don't know what kind of parties you guys were going to, but that was never one of the drugs of choice when I was growing up, or at least in the high school era. I think I missed it by like a decade. So I never experienced it recreationally ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either. But apparently that was the thing back in the 70s and 60s. So
yeah,
the stigma lives on, unfortunately, because it's certainly slows progress in that arena.
You're 100%. And that's what I find a lot of times is even in conversation, because again, I've written protocol for EMS and law enforcement, and you talk to those professionals and they tell you, they're like, it's illegal. Or my favorite question is, is it legal what you're doing? Yeah. Yeah, 100% it's legal. So I think it's kind of comical in a sense, but it's eye-opening because of how much people are unaware of how just beautiful it is for depression and anxiety and just a time out, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And that education gap is something that we're working to fill through Ketamine Academy and all the content we push out. You know, you got the ASKP now and a variety of other organizations, the Psychedelic Medical Association, all putting out content. So hopefully that educational gap gets filled in short order. So did you use it all? I'm curious, as a paramedic during your practice? I know that that's a thing now. Well, recently it's kind of been in the news because of a couple of mishaps with higher dose ketamine infusions and people trying to blame it on the ketamine. But just out of curiosity, was that part of your practice as a paramedic when you were in practice?
So when I worked in the field, it was morphine and Versed. We
Mm-hmm.
had Valium for a short period of time and then transitioned to Versed. So really, we had the opioid side of the house and benzos,
Mm-hmm.
where I teach, and it's beautiful because I teach pharmacology. So it was easy to dance along with you in the academy side of it. But where the new component of ketamine in the field has been maybe the last year and a half, 2 years. So really, that stemmed for me as a professional and an educator, just
Mm-hmm.
to know it in and out so that I can conversate with the students and at least give them awareness of what and
Yeah.
how we're providing it in the field. And then the stories that they give me alongside of it are just spectrum. The spectrum is immense.
Yeah.
And so trying to help them realize what it truly is doing in the field, so that we can help patients when they do experience perhaps too quick of a dose,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't do large dosing, but it's up to the provider and how fast essentially it's given, which can cause hallucinations or essentially what people describe as a K-hole,
Mm-hmm.
just because it throws them so quickly into their subconscious that they don't, it's hard to discern. And then it actually creates a stigma for the providers because they don't know what to do. They think it's the drug, rather than just it's too much too soon
Yeah.
or too quickly.
Yeah, that's kind of, I feel like, why IM hasn't really taken a hold as much as the infusions, because the infusions are titratable. They have a much slower onset, whereas you have a few clinicians around the country giving IM and some giving larger doses of IM in a single injection, which can be quite a different experience than a low dose, slow infusion that's titratable. And so, yeah, the experience is definitely different on the two routes of administration because of that speed of onset and the
Yes.
fact that you can't reduce the dose once it's been in. Um, so how long has your practice actually been open?
We established everything in August of last year. I officially opened in November. We hit 100 patients in our time in Redlands, and then I just recently transitioning down to the Encinitas area, which this is our first launch of that office down there. So I'm pretty excited to be a part of that area as
Yeah.
well. Because one thing, Jason, that we've incorporated is assisted psychotherapy. So
Mm-hmm.
doing it along with the psychology component embedded in the infusion. So that's where it creates just that much more of progress to get in. It's not necessarily just the experientials, even though we do offer those sessions, but it incorporates a lot more of the psychology before and after, not just the infusion in itself. So
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And it seems to be the way things are moving. You know, in 2017, 2016, when this was first starting to roll out, JAMA Psychiatry in 2017 published their consensus guidelines. And they basically described a medical infusion with no therapy, just the dose of ketamine by itself. But things seem to be evolving. There seems to be a more support for not only mental health involvement, which is great if you're treating mental health patients, but also the psychotherapy, the ketamine assisted psychotherapy part of it. So I would love it if you could just sort of describe that for anybody who's not super familiar with the ketamine assisted psychotherapy. How is that experience different from just a patient walking in, getting their low dose ketamine infusion, and then going home?
because they're not alone in what they experience.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the knowingness goes in beforehand of just understanding what the intentions are behind the ketamine experience and what they're trying to truly work through, whether it's something as not simple, but in its complexities of perhaps a single event versus some deeper childhood wounds. So the pre-course work and honoring the intentions before session, and then coming into just having a therapy session beforehand for comfortability with the psychologist before you come in for a ketamine experience. And then what to do with what you're shown. So whether that's languaged during session or the importance of being able to process outwardly after session's over, so that they really do start to feel closure and or fill in that gap, because the experiences are just immense. I mean, we've had people experience and remember back to when they were 1 year old. And we've had others that really just process through the compartmentalizing. So the intimacy is based off of each individual. So there's really not a blanketed approach to it. It's very sacred in the sense that it's intimate to each person and what they're able to do with what they're shown afterwards. It's beautiful for what it allows for, the emotional release and essentially the closure to things that have been ruminating and or debilitating for years.
Yeah, and it really makes much more sense that that would be more effective. And I don't know that the studies have really conclusively said anything in detail on that yet. It seems to be likely. But I think definitely the experience is probably better for the patient. Just anecdotally, leave out like the efficacy part of it, because I feel like, yeah, you're right. They have somebody to go through that experience with, to verbalize it, to better understand it. So you're doing a pre-infusion therapy session, then the ketamine, and then post-infusion session afterwards. Is that how you're?
Yeah. So essentially, the Journal of American Medicine published the series of 6, and ideally in that literature, everybody had the same DSM as well as BMI, which when it's given IV, those are, well, at least the BMI component is irrelevant in the sense that it's not fat or water soluble in the sense of how it's being metabolized. So that kind of goes to the wayside, where that series of 6 is very beneficial, but it's not limited to. So just allowing the knowingness beforehand where the complexity in the psychology is, that you may need more or less before you have those breakthroughs, and the honesty of how you cope outside of seeking this therapy, because that does weigh heavily on the dosing structure, to where the dosing structure can fluctuate. Like, for example, binge drinking or alcoholism really does require heavier dosing than that of someone who is recreational in its use or doesn't use it as the main piece in their attempt to moot that negative self-talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So out of curiosity, what is the difference between where your practice first was? So is this a second practice, or are you guys just relocating? Just to be clear.
We're relocating.
Okay.
I'm actually looking at another office space in Redlands to be able to have, so people don't have to travel as far for the experience. So not having it full time, but having it weekly space available for those that are coming from far away.
Gotcha. And the sort of demographic and regional differences, is one area larger than the other?
Yeah, and it's about a 2-hour drive time, so a good 100-mile difference. Yeah.
And so where you're moving to now has a larger population size to pull from? Yeah.
It does, and it's surrounded by a lot of naturopaths. So those that are in the more holistic means of reconnecting with self. It's truly, we could go through all these sessions, and if we don't know how to honor what we're shown and to have those lifestyle changes, then it almost creates a disadvantage, if you will, because they don't know how to step into new ways of being and doing, and you just kind of default right back to the same, which is counterproductive. So we're surrounded by a lot of that, is the naturopathic side or the more holistic approach to wellness.
Is that part of the reason why you chose to move, or was it for other reasons? I'm just curious to.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the factors,
Gotcha.
as well as the psychologist I'm working with down there has space in close proximity.
Oh,
So it allows for her to be able to do both.
I see.
Yeah.
Awesome. So first practice, roughly, what would you say the population was within like a 45-minute or so radius? Any ideas on what that might have been? Just
As
to
far
get
as
a
age wise or like
just overall population, because a lot of people are wondering if like a certain location might be good enough to start a practice, roughly how busy they might expect to be with various locations. So it's one of the things I like to draw out is like, okay, what size um, city or town were you in, and gauge how busy clinics were.
Yeah, and it's all Southern California based, right? So
Mhm.
it still has a very large population here. I really think it comes down to courage of trying something that is essentially taboo and not recognizing that everything is essentially a drug. And to kind of allow ketamine to become uh, something that you're not ashamed of admitting to, right? Because you say you're going to do ketamine, and it's almost like a why, or is that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to just say it. So I think now that psychedelics have become more of a topic, that it's not self-limiting for location
Mhm.
because it's becoming more and more okay in society, if you will,
Right.
to try something new, especially if what you've been doing isn't working.
Mhm. Awesome. So when you first were deciding that maybe ketamine, opening a ketamine practice was something that you wanted to do, roughly what was that timeline for you between the time that you're like, okay, I think I'm going to go this route, or I know I'm going to go this route, to actually opening up a practice? Because you are really unique in that you are a paramedic by training. And a lot of potential clinicians who are not physicians just have this false belief that they can't start a practice or be the founder of a practice or own a practice because there's too many challenges if they're not a physician. And you totally debunked that with your practice, which is awesome. So congratulations.
Thank
So what was that timeline, and what was that mental process like for you to to get over that hurdle and get things going?
It was 5 months, Jason.
Uh-huh.
And in that, it was a full, one of the first physicians I ever worked with as a paramedic in the field. I went to him and I just asked his hand in helping and allowing for depression and anxiety. I mean, it's so prevalent in our field already. That's majority of our calls. And to be able to have a knowingness of how to help that, he said yes. And when he said yes, it was like, well, okay. And so it allowed everything to unfold. And then using my time during COVID, it was idealistic. I had one of those just knowingness of it's either I make it or we watch others do it. And so in that, it was the ability to step in 100% and just give it everything I had to this right here. And it's incredible because it really happened so quickly, but it was in the ability just to keep saying yes,
Mhm.
not allowing the step backs or the lessons to be discouraging and continuing, because you're absolutely right. Uh, it isn't easy, but it also isn't challenging as long as you have pieces to rely on. And the way that you progressed through this academy was spot on. And in that, the legal side of it, because California did have some complexities in that.
Mhm.
I was very fortunate to find an attorney who understood that MSO, or just the partnership in it,
Mhm.
which did take a lot of monies. So that is essentially one of the challenges, I guess you could say. But because I believe in it with my whole heart,
Yeah.
I liquidated everything and just went all in is in this establishment to make sure that the legal side was accurate and that I was acting within scope, because California really, you don't see it run unless it is a physician doing it.
Right.
Yeah. So that partnership was, that took a lot of creating.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad that you took the advice in the course, which is to get an attorney, because so many mistakes can be made if you don't find the right attorney, for sure. And especially because, just like you said, California has some special hurdles to jump over and to figure workarounds, because a physician, I believe, has to own 51% of the business at least. And so you have to create an MSO, a management services organization, to basically run the practice. So if you don't mind, do you mind giving us a quick rundown on how that's sort of structured in California if you're not a physician?
Yeah, we first created a professional corporation in
Mhm.
which my physician is 100% owner of, and I sit as the vice president in that corporation.
Mhm.
And then I created a second corporation, which is an LLC. And then in that is where we have created contract and that MSO in order to partner with each other for me to be able to provide service underneath of
Mhm.
that PC organizational structure as the LLC to execute the treatment,
Mhm.
and then having him on site or honoring the telemedicine side, which is also beautiful in the COVID sense,
Mhm.
to have physician on site for the performance or the actual infusions to undergo. And
Yeah.
then having working knowledge of just ALS and all of the, or ACLS,
Mhm.
and where the complexities come in, knowing where the conscious sedation doses are, and being able to dance in that spectrum, allow that side to be easy in a sense, but it was just the partnership or the contracting side to operate underneath of his license as
Mhm.
medical direction under that corporation. So we established quite a few corporations and agreements in that, and it really was one of the first of its kind, at least on my attorney's side. He had a lot of background in psychedelics, but in partnership in Canada and other areas. So
Mhm.
bringing it here, because one of the other components, Jason, that I find true or really special in this is the wellness side. So allowing them to have a two-prong approach to healing and seeing or just having new methodologies of how to cope. So we incorporated sound baths and breath work, yoga, other components to be able to restructure yourself as you learned all the things that are shown to you in ketamine sessions.
I love it. I love the more holistic approach versus what we were doing years ago when ketamine first came. And some clinics are still doing the, sort of the medical model, but I just think that there's so much more that can be offered to patients in the terms of the therapy and the other integrative medicines that you can and therapies that you can offer. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, cool. So what were some of the other challenges that maybe you faced? You really knocked the ball out of the park with that one, and you actually brought up a really good point too, where you mentioned that you have to be able to push through those challenges, and you have to really, the people that really succeed are the ones that believe in it, like you said, wholeheartedly. They're not just doing it to try and create a side business. There are people who really believe in this therapy. They've been touched personally by somebody who has depression or maybe committed suicide or has seen somebody respond well to the ketamine therapy. At least that's what I've seen. And so I'm glad that you found your motivation to help you push through the challenges. What were some other challenges that maybe you faced along the way, and what advice would you offer to anybody who has some challenges to keep pushing through?
It really comes down to the monies, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, my conversations with a lot of potential clients, if you will, I really don't like calling them patients because they are clients in this. Is the hardship right now with COVID and how much depression has set in and how there's no monies, right? Or it's not backed by insurance. So that also creates the complexities. And right now, I have created a nonprofit branch of business to be able to provide scholarships and to have donors come in to pay for those that are seeking the treatment that can't afford it themselves. So that really is one area, is where it comes down to being able to pay the clinicians. And I made a promise to myself as far as where my whole heart and intention is. I'm very fortunate to have a full-time job. And in that, I spend my time working as a professor, and then my whole heart and intention goes into creating this, which is exhausting in a sense, but it's also very rewarding. So understanding how monies aren't easy, and that's one of the things, is not being discouraged by people who want the treatment but can't necessarily afford the treatment. Being bold enough to sit on those insurance boards and to be able to create the super bills, or just the diligence that goes into reminding myself that it's okay that people essentially are discouraged, I guess, by price, and giving them so many different other avenues to be able to still have the care from ketamine, and knowing that it can be supported from other means. So really that's one of the biggest complexities, is the money side.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, since it's not covered by insurance, there's more marketing that has to happen. There's obviously patients that can't afford it. And so you have to find creative solutions to that. I love that you created a nonprofit. I know a couple of other clinic owners that have created a nonprofit and GoFundMe pages to collect donations to raise money so that they can cover partial treatments, and the patient pays less, or just cover the treatment in full. A lot of them are doing treatments for free or reduced costs for veterans. So I think that's great. And there's all sorts of workarounds. You mentioned super bills, and now there's software around the different EMRs. Osmind is one of them that has the super bill built out. I think they released that feature just recently. Reimbursify is another one that sort of simplifies that process for practices. So all sorts of different avenues to pursue as far as solutions to helping patients be able to afford the service. Unfortunately, we would all wish that we could drop the price, but you have a business to run. So it costs money to pay your insurance, the clinicians, your rent, your utilities. So dropping the price isn't really always an option for most. So awesome that you found some great workarounds. What about for clinicians? What advice would you have for other clinicians who are thinking of starting a practice and reach some hurdles?
As far as even on the administration side, so Osmind, again, I love them. So I really appreciate you just showing that piece, because they are one of the greatest assets to this whole process. That and Caretaker, partnering with Caretaker was just incredible. For the vital signs to be wireless, is just so beautiful. In the very beginning, because of some of the cost, even the pumps and being able to manually drip ketamine infusions, that right there in itself is a game changer, especially if there's pump failure or whatever the other cases are. But just omitting some of those pieces and doing it manually. And then, that saves a lot of money off the top, especially in materials and supplies, because then you're just using the most simplest form of administration, and that's manual. And that also eliminated a lot of noise. I noticed when patients were going through or having experiences, if there was that beeping of an occlusion or something along those lines, it was a distractor. So that helped definitely as a workaround. And just minimizing the equipment is really the biggest thing. You don't need as much as you really think you need. So that was one of my learnings in it, is just how simple it truly can be versus how much we want additionally.
Yeah, it's funny. You see a lot of anesthesia providers sort of going the opposite end of the spectrum, just because we're used to having so much equipment and tools. And then people in the field who are used to not having all those equipment and tool and fancy pieces of stuff to make things easier, or are way more comfortable with doing things manually, which is great. So definitely, those pumps aren't cheap. Even a syringe pump, which is one of the cheapest options, you're talking $600-700 refurbished, or double that new. So they have a substantial amount of revenue, and they are annoying when they have those occlusions, for sure.
And if you can't easily troubleshoot, plus having a psychologist in there who wasn't essentially ACLS certified or whatnot, they can't be responsible for those vital signs. So just allowing that piece to be lessened on their stress level, even though they're watching the vital signs, still being able to less is more. Yeah. that was definitely one of the pieces for sure.
Well, awesome. So what was the size of your first practice, if you don't mind me asking? And then are you going to some place that's about the same size? Are you expanding a bit, or what are you doing now?
We had 2 offices and we were just kind of rotating those offices. So allowing patients to have we had 90-minute appointments that were scheduled, which allowed them to come in, settle in, for the IVs to be started, and then them kind of just become more comfortable with the psychologist, and then using the other room for the second patient. And so that way the patient in the first room could then take their time after session, whether it was having a snack or just collecting thoughts. And then now in this setting, I've actually moved it to 2-hour sessions, to where there's more time afterwards for closing up patients. So that's one of the things that I have just incorporated now from those first learnings in office, is allowing longer timeframes with the psychologist so that they can leave there with more closure, right? It's almost like you don't want to see them. You're like, are you okay? Especially with all the things that they experience in there. So I think that is very special in itself, and allowing more time. And then the patients that are having the one-time experience, having a 3-hour session so that they can spend a good hour just sharing their story or where their intentions are for healing, and then going into session. And now incorporating even some of those first experiences with the psychologist, having troches or having lozenges embedded as their first time experience, just so that they can lighten their load for when they are sharing their story. Because the guard comes up, especially if it's deep in psychology or the wounds,
Yeah.
So those are a couple pieces that we've incorporated now that we didn't have then. Yeah.
Awesome. Are you prescribing the troches? In case anybody's watching doesn't know what that is, it's just the lozenge, the ketamine lozenge. Do you guys prescribe them for patients to take home, or is that like an in-clinic experience or treatment that you guys offer?
So we're looking at both. Right now it's an in-clinic experience, because we're not doing any of the telemedicine in that sense. But for patients that do very well, or that have extended periods of time before they can come in for their next session, then giving them the prescription for troches to be used at home. Yeah, we're definitely looking at that side of the house right now. But again, in office first, and then being able to send them home with it as well.
Yeah, I've seen some clinics doing that, just to sort of extend the duration in between infusions if they have to come back for the boosters. There seems to be some correlation there that the infusion doesn't have to happen in such a narrow window if they have the troches to take home. Could potentially come with a little bit more liability issues, but some people are comfortable with that, with certain obviously protocols and standards in place. Limited quantity rules around, the patient can't say that they all melted in my car, or my friend took them from me, or I lost them and then they want a new prescription or something like that. It doesn't work like that, right? So it's pretty stringent process for those that are doing it.
And it's very limited, you're right, in quantity. It's
Yeah.
not 30, it's giving 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw recently that Mindbloom is actually doing troche experiences where they'll mail the patients, or the patient picks it up from the pharmacy, and then they'll schedule a teleconsult, which is interesting practice model. That was the first place that I've seen doing that. But there looks like a pretty big practice out of New York and expanding, so must be working for them.
Yeah. Which I mean that I've contemplated that. However, it still is a variable, because again, you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to find that balance between the legal and risks of possible bad outcomes versus what's convenient and best for the patient. So obviously different businesses have different areas or ranges on the spectrum where they like to lie on that. So I'm curious, so you said that you found a physician partner and now you have a psychologist as well. What did that process look like for you as far as finding them? And real quick, I just want to encourage anybody who's watching on the live stream, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and we can bring those up here too. Encourage you to leave those if you have any. But what was that process looking like for you as far as working with a physician, because that's another like objection or hurdle that some people have that they feel is insurmountable, and it's the only thing stopping them from opening up a practice is, oh my gosh, I have to find a physician to partner with or hire, and I don't know any physicians interested. Yeah, so walk us through that if you don't mind.
It was in the relationship building over the last 15, 20 years in practice as a paramedic. Just that working relationship is crucial. So his trust in me, as well as my trust in him, allowed for us to unfold in that relationship beautifully. Because again, it's practicing medicine. And so in that, you have to have courage to try. Because otherwise, I mean, in medicine already, we practice continuously. You see how much even just CPR changes over the years. So his courage to lean in with the education component. So that's where a lot of just grace and acceptance for what was being created, running the protocols by him first. And again, he's an ER doctor, so he's used ketamine in practice in the emergency room for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And understands that side of it, to where knowing that dosing structure versus the dosing structure that we're honoring, and how much it is lessened in our clinical setting versus the conscious sedation setting. So that really did eliminate a lot of complexities or uncertainties. And then again, allowing it to unfold, or him experience it. I think one of the most beautiful things he said to me, Jason, he goes, I've never worked somewhere where the patients want to stay.
Yeah.
And it was just like, and that is huge, because again, in the ER, everyone's like, they want to get out of there. They want their drugs and they want to go. And to have people processing and experiencing such peace from these sessions really was an eye opener for him, to where now that's where a lot of the driving force and heart is helping all of those around us, to include us as professionals. The benefit is just immense. And the unknowingness of that is where it's uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
really it's education on his end. I shared majority of my time over there just in the teachings of how this works, the default network, and all of the things that we experience as a human, and how to come out of that.
Yeah.
So that was where him and I's relationship just grew, was in sharing the how and the why.
Yeah, that's great that you were able to develop that relationship over time. And it's great that it's always easier if somebody's familiar with ketamine, at least. The biggest hurdle that I've seen is, people trying to approach a family medicine doc, or maybe a psychiatrist who's never started an IV, or doesn't know anything about ketamine, hasn't picked up a journal article in a decade, trying to convince them that ketamine is something that they should partner on. So much easier with somebody who's experienced. That's why I see a lot of anesthesia providers. You do see a lot of ER doctors in this space, because they're familiar with ketamine at higher doses, and they see that this low dose, super low dose. I mean, patients are all wide awake and talking. It is not, deep sedation. You barely, even in high dose pain infusions, touch moderate sedation. Most of this is light sedation to anxiolysis, and so it's not as intimidating or as scary as a lot of people think that it is, because it's not high dose that you see in the ER or OR for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And that's where I think the uncomfortability comes, is because of unknowingness,
Yeah.
or thinking that it is all the things that you've heard beforehand.
Yeah.
Again, the default for most brains is date rape, or it's an animal tranquilizer, which is another common one that I get. And I'm like, well, right. And so it's that debunking that is crucial, because otherwise that's where it gets lost in translation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So what, out of curiosity, do you have any experiences with patients where you were there at the practice and somebody responded really well? Do you have a story or two that particularly stands out?
It is incredible what a gift it is for patients. And really, it's even in their own learnings. I found that there's influence in even who drives them to session, and when they leave session, of what they do with the information that was shown to them. Again, the breakthroughs and just the the release of emotion is one of the most incredible gifts. It is so powerful in those rooms, especially when they're progressing through childhood trauma. I mean, again, I think one of the most standouts to me was a woman who went all the way back to when she was 1.
Mm-hmm.
And the forgiveness that comes with that is just incredibly powerful. Keeping that open heart and that open space for them to just share it's one of the greatest gifts to human. It truly, with my whole heart, I believe that. But it's the ability to surrender and to feel safe enough to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
I worked diligently to make sure it didn't feel clinic-like, and to make sure that they did settle in. One piece that I use is gravity blankets, so that it has that constant weight on them, so they do feel as if they're being held or grounded,
Mm-hmm.
which is beautiful. And then the nervousness coming in, understanding the white coat hypertension. So just allowing people to settle in. I think one of the most common questions, because again, I push a lot of this towards firemen and how beneficial it is to them, just period, let alone for the PTSD aspect.
Mm-hmm.
They always say to me, they're like, well, what do I say in there? And you're just like, that's the beauty of it. Like, there is no specifics. Like, even if you wanted to be silent your whole time, that's fine. And knowing that there's not legal ramifications to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's clinical notes, and then there's the psychology notes, and the separation of those two. So full surrender. And you see patients really start to lean into that around the 3rd session.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the first time it's curiosity. You can see that they're waiting to feel something. And because it's so subtle and the onset is so slow, there's not an inebriation. There's not an intoxication feeling that we're used to, at least if you've ever been intoxicated from alcohol before or experienced with drugs. It's nothing of that kind. And so that's the uncomfortability. It's just like, oh, well, I guess that wasn't that bad. And so then coming back in, they're able to surrender more and more. And by the time they hit that 3rd session, that's where truly breakthroughs start to come in, and letting guard down to where it's safe to cry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you want to clear a room real quick, just talk about sadness and crying, where on this side of the house, we're encouraging that.
Yeah.
And knowing that they're safe enough to do it, and then it doesn't leave that room.
Awesome. I love it. It sounds like you are running an amazing practice. So I love what you guys are doing over there, and really focusing on the patient and the patient experience. I think you guys are right on point. So congratulations on everything that you're doing. We're already winding down. These interviews always fly by because they're always so much fun to hear how everybody's doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoy languaging with you so much because it really takes courage to do what you're doing. It does. And it's the same courage. Like, I videotape or podcast and just voice note all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's courage because, again, it's unorthodox.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you so much so for just spearheading it.
Well, thank you, Christi. Appreciate the support. Speaking of podcasts, I did notice you have a podcast coming up soon. Did you already start it? Is it? Okay.
So that is where the startings come in. I actually connected with Psychedelic Spotlight. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those guys.
Not yet.
And I did a podcast with them. So
Mm-hmm.
that is linked on there. And then an article through OSMind for EMS,
Mm-hmm.
and how psychedelics are so beneficial in our field.
Awesome. Love it. So no podcast of your own in the works yet?
Yes, that is where,
okay.
that is where I am working on that daily. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I hope, is it going to be ketamine related? I take it is if it's on your ketamine. Okay, cool. I'm excited to hear about it and listen to it once it's out. So definitely post it in the group when it's out and ping me, and I will share it so we can get some listeners for you. And any questions on the podcasting realm, however I can help, I'm happy to do that. Been doing it.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I would love to pick your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're definitely welcome to. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate it. This has been wonderful. Last thing I wanted to ask is, where do you see your practice and where do you see yourself in the next few years as it relates to ketamine?
Oh, in full swing, in harm reduction, in psychedelic awareness, and just knowingness. To incorporate psilocybin is definitely in my next 2 to 3 years as we let down our guard as far as where we've scheduled that drug and what that can do for patients as well, or clients. But this being my primary focus as the years unfold.
Awesome. Love it.
Thank you.
Well, cool, Christi. Best of luck to you. Can't wait to see that podcast. And again, thank you. And yeah, appreciate it so much.
I appreciate you, Jason.
Got it. All right. We'll see you later.
Bye. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.